That's how
Right.
I pictured it.
I mean, it's true. I think the political, discourse is there's a lot of data, there's a lot of talking out there, and it's kind of you got to kind of rise to the top, and that's why we already talked about just finding those connections. You got to get your message above the heap somehow because there's a lot of noise out there, on social media, on there's so many more news sources now, both social media and others, than there were before. There's a lot of noise, and if you want your message to be remembered and rise above, you got to really work at that. It's not an easy. Some of these new York members because they're going to be significant on a lot of these votes for the industry, and we don't really know them. There's not a lot of oil and gas production I mean, there's virtually no oil and gas production in New York, and there's, as you mentioned, a moratorium essentially on new pipeline construction in the state. So we went and met a lot of these folks and introduced ourselves, and we found out that in a lot of their races, in these districts where they took a plus 9 or a plus 10 Biden district, it was all energy prices. It was that was the main issue that a lot of these folks ran on. It was not only at the pump, but it was high prices for heating oil and for gas and just for everything. And it was frustration by your typical voters on hey, why aren't we building a pipeline into this state when we have this growing demand. And so we got to know these members a lot, and we actually found some of the members had manufacturing facilities in their district that were making products in our supply chain. So it was really worthwhile to have those conversations and to not just write off a geographic area and think, oh, it's New York, they're probably not going to care as much about our issues. Let's not go talk to them. I think it's always worthwhile to talk, and you're going to find connections that maybe you didn't even know existed, and connections on issues, connections on manufacturing facilities. So it's interesting to look back at how that worked out, and certainly a lot of these seats that those members did manage to take are going to be in play again this next cycle, and will be battlegrounds districts for a lot of those folks.
So you drove the train right into the station of the election that is going on this year, obviously, and we had previously discussed that going into an election year is going to add a lot of uncertainty. And one thing I know is that the markets, at the very least Wall Street, the markets, they do not like uncertainty. So I think we're going to look at sort of like a sideways year on that, but that's traditionally what happens. Is the same thing going to happen more or less with energy policy at this point, given that we're going into an election year? Nobody wants to risk their political capital on a topic when they're trying to focus on re-election, or how do you see that happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly the role that energy policy is going to play in this election, I think, is something everyone's thinking about, wondering about. We haven't seen it on the national scale come out, preeminently yet. Energy was briefly mentioned at the president's, State of the Union. We've seen a lot of political pushback on the LNG pause. We've seen that. We've seen some pushback on the Biden lease, offshore lease plan, but it hasn't been, I'd say, in the top 5 issues yet. I think that's going to change. We have a debate coming up in June. I am sure there will be a number of questions on energy, and I'm sure that the president will have to defend his leasing plan, the LNG pause. And I do expect former President Trump to use those lines of attack. I think a lot will depend on what the price of gas is, throughout the rest of this month. President Biden surely is feeling pressure on inflation. I think that's the number one issue. Certainly for young voters, for middle class families, for a lot of demographics, and whether or not former President Trump is successful in tying, kind of the Biden energy policy to inflation and making that connection, we'll see. But I certainly do think that to be a focus of that first debate coming up in June.
No, you are absolutely right. because many subjects, or one is allowed the luxury of taking any position that one wants at any given time, as long as it doesn't affect your pocketbook. The second it touches your wallet, now we're having a completely different kind of conversation.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the lines that I find most fascinating, because at that point, the hypocrisy is broken. At that point, it has literally been shattered. I believe this. I believe that. Another $10. Oh, hell no. Oh, hell to the no. And they're going to go that way. So then really, what is it about? And I think it's very disingenuous, even to the supporters. Let's just say people anti-oil and gas, for lack of a better term at the moment. It's incredibly disingenuous, because then when push comes to shove, standing on the street corner with your neighbors, with your friends, with the store owners, being like, this is unbearable. This is untenable. Can't afford this. Prices are going up. And we're being assaulted on every level. At what point are we even being given a break? And then you find out that concessions are being made to other countries that run rampant against the very policies that we say that we're for. No, it's very disheartening and very disingenuous. So I'm wondering, you're one of those people that actually fits this matrix right at the crux between hyperbolic rhetoric and reality. Because like you say, there has to be relationships, there have to be communications with members of Congress so they understand the realities of going on in their district. What are some of the receptions that you get from members of Congress? You don't have to mention anyone in particular, but just in general, when you highlight some of the work that the Energy Technology Workforce Council is doing.
Well, it's a good question. I think, it's about relationships, and it's about forming, relationships with members that care. And a lot of that is strategy, because, there are members and there are regions that they don't necessarily want, at least initially, want to hear about, what workers in this sector are doing, or what our issues are. But it's our job to find those connections and kind of make them care. And you can do it with the majority of members if you put your time in, and you put your work, your homework in, and try to find those connections. You can do it. But there certainly are members that just don't want to hear it, and aren't gonna engagement with them is not worth it. So you got to be strategic. But I think the biggest mistake folks in energy and oil and gas have made in the past is not to try, right? Is to just say, we're only going to talk to one side of the aisle. We're only going to talk to Republicans. We're only going to talk to people from, oil producing areas. And then we're just not going to bother with anybody else. And I think that's a mistake. I think you have to broaden your, everybody needs friends, and you gotta preach to the choir sometimes, and you got to talk to the folks who brung you to the dance. And that's all important, but you also have to kind of go out on those margins, I think. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is looking for those relationships and going to places maybe where you might get a little salty response, but that's fine. You go out there and you keep trying, and sometimes you'd be surprised where you find a connection.
Well, absolutely. I think Nixon goes to China. I think they're right. There you go. What a coup, and what a surprise, by doing what most people think, because the common wisdom would tell you that's not something to do. But it's right. Bucking the common wisdom that gets things moving forward, because the common wisdom just becomes stasis, becomes static to a certain point.
And one thing just one point I wanted to add there is, one thing I have noticed has changed is, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, energy security that issue has broadened, significantly the number of members and folks on kind of both sides of the aisle that are willing to listen to a lot of the arguments and facts, that folks kind of, with our perspective are putting out. I think it has changed the game some. beginning of the Biden administration, pre-Russian invasion, there was a lot of rhetoric going on that was kind of unchecked, and people didn't want to hear from the other side. And things, I have seen a little bit of a change since that invasion, because it kind of reminded everybody in a, unfortunately, very stark and brutal way, is that, hey, energy matters, and if you don't know where you're getting your energy from and you can't trust that source, it can be an existential threat to your country, your economy, very quickly. So I have seen a little bit of a change there. Doesn't mean it's gonna, everyone's gonna get together and kumbaya all of a sudden, but I do see a little bit of a shift post Ukraine.
Pardon me. No, I agree with you, because I think this is a trope in a lot of movies as well, is, you have two warring factions, but then when you have an invader from the outside, then your two factions get together to fight the common enemy. And I think that is incredibly important. I wonder too about this, because this is something that frequently gets missed out of the conversations, and with all due respect to those that make the argument, talking about American energy independence and American security it's a very hard thing in a way. It's a very hard circle to square. Why? Because most of our stuff is exported, and we import back because of the quality of crude that we produce. I think the one thing that's missing is that we don't have significant enough refineries in this nation to supply ourselves, which is why so much of the crude has to be shipped out, because it is just not appropriate for consumption in the United States. And we have not, again, going back to permitting, we're not seeing enough refineries being built. Did I just see recently there's a new refinery coming up? And what do you see on the legislative landscape for that? Because with that, we're going to have a hard time in the next few years.
Yeah, great point. And it's funny you mentioned that. I was reading an article in the Houston Chronicle just earlier today about the first brand new refinery in 50 years. It's going to be in Brownsville, Texas. We have had refinery expansions in the past 50 years, but the important distinction there is that they're able to use some of the same permits from the original facility. They don't have to go through the whole permitting process. So that opens up the whole permitting question. But you are 100% right. We need more refining capacity in the United States. In a scenario where there's a worldwide disruption in the supply chain, not something like we saw even during COVID, or potential conflicts around the world that can disrupt the flow of oil and gas that we currently rely on. So I do think it's an important part of that American energy security equation is to have ample refining capacity in the United States. Certainly maybe you're never going to have 100%, but if you can get, the closer you get to that, I think is in our benefit, and it's only going to help us, down the line. So couldn't agree more.
No, I do appreciate that, because you made a very prescient statement in another interview, which is the things that we're doing today and the curtailment and the pausing. Or here, let me back up real quick. I grew up in New York City, and one of the sayings that we had in the city is, let's say you're going to leave for work every morning at 7:30. 7:30 leave. There's a thing. Just because you leave your house 5 minutes later does not guarantee you're going to get to work 5 minutes later, right? That 5 minute delay could result in a 1.5 hour delay in your getting to work. Right. And the pausing that we're doing now is going to cripple, or has the potential to cripple, the nation several years down the road if we are not actively pursuing all of the available opportunities that we have. Could you explain to me, and I'm fascinated about this, and I'll circle back to why, but could you explain a little bit about what's going on with the offshore and how come we're not getting more offshore production?
Right. Well, I think your point is right on. The arguments that we'll hear for not having more lease sales offshore will typically be, oh, there's plenty of production going on offshore. Don't worry about it, basically. we don't need to have more lease sales. It's fine. We're producing plenty offshore, and that's the argument that we'll hear. What is missing in that argument is that the investments in offshore are typically 10 years out, maybe 15. These companies have to not only get the parcel, obtain the parcel, they have to bring in a significant amount of investment, a significant amount of capital investment to build these facilities, to do all the seismic work, and then bring the facility online. We're talking 15 years. So the production that's going on in the Gulf right now that is supplying our energy, and some of it's being exported, some of it's being used domestically, that is based on decisions, financial and political and government, that were made probably 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago even. So those decisions are allowing us to do what we do today. So it is a disservice to our kids, my kids, everybody's kids, to make decisions now. They're going to put them in a more vulnerable position for their own energy security, their economic livelihoods, especially for the ones that live on the Gulf Coast, that will live in the Gulf Coast. So we got to remember that is these decisions we're making. It's not just about us. It's not just about us this summer, or how much we're going to pay when we drive to the beach later in the summer. It's about what our kids are going to be paying when they go on their vacation, 20 years from now. And same with the LNG pause. We'll hear the defense of that in that, oh, don't worry, we're exporting plenty of natural gas right now. Our allies are okay. They're getting the gas they need. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. Well, again, it's missing a big point of the equation here. Is our allies, folks like Germany, Japan, they are thinking 5-10 years down the line. Their job, their responsibility is to ensure that their population has energy to keep them warm and provide support their economic development in their industry. So they're not thinking about this summer. They're not thinking about even next year. They're thinking about where they're going to be in 5-10 years, and they're looking to sign contracts out that far. So when you add an uncertainty to that, and you say, well, we can cover you now, but who knows about a couple years down the line, that's not really helping anybody out. So certainly I'll push back on that argument whenever I have the opportunity, because I do think it's kind of short-sighted, and it's not fair to the good folks that are going to inherit our country down the road. So.
No, without a doubt, and that's something that I love America. I love America. But man, sometimes we just do things in such a weird way. France, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're building, I could be wrong, I think they're building new nuclear reactors. One of the things that I had understood in terms of nuclear power, and please, I beg you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the things that has happened is that in Europe, about 20, 30 years ago, they settled on basically 2 or 3 different plant design types. And those 2 or 3 different plant design types were approved. And of course, much like our torpedoes from World War II, right? They'd had a lot of testing. And so we already knew very well how they functioned. And so the French went ahead, and in all of Europe, actually, they pick between the 2 or 3 designs, and they move forward. What I had come to understand was that in the United States, there had been so many new type of plant designs with so many different kinds of technologies that had not been tested, that was part of the problem of permitting. That maybe had the United States solidified around 2 or 3 designs that were solid, then we could have had more of a proliferation of that. But it sort of undid itself by following different ends. What's your input to that, or what do you see about that?
Yeah, I will admit I'm not an expert on nuclear. I do know a little bit on the periphery. We do have some companies, in our membership they're really taking another look at nuclear, even on the small modular reactor side, because they do think that there is an opportunity there. And I think one of the biggest challenges, speaking of challenges we're going to have going forward, is going to be finding enough power to support the tremendous growth in grid and demand on our grids in the next 10, 15 years from AI, data centers, and just general, growth across the board. And, we don't have enough capacity. I personally think, natural gas generation is going to make up a big chunk of that, but nuclear certainly has a space. And you're right. I mean, I think when I say we in the United States, we had a couple of incidents, in the 70s, and it just kind of really slowed down the appetite for new permitting for nuclear. And I do think there's a lot of folks that are taking a second look, not only at new facilities, but also extending the life of some of our older facilities and retooling and repurposing them to get another 10, 15 years out of those facilities. So
Well, there's no choice. But there's no choice there's no choice because we only have X amount of reactors in the country. You shut them down. Well, what are you going to replace it with? Hamsters in a giant wheel? Like that, where's that going to come from? So without a doubt. Do you think, and I'm loath to use this term, but it keeps coming to me, so I'm going to use it, right? Which is an eco-fetishist. Okay. And what do I mean by that, right? Is that, of course, we all want clean air. And this is something that I find so diabolical, as if people who work in oil and gas don't want clean air, as if we don't want clean water. That is such a horrible argument to make, as if we don't care about our children. But do you think that the rhetoric that is being pushed to such an extreme is disallowing rational answer finding? Or, as we had discussed previously, do we as a country, loosely speaking, allow explicitly left and right, Democrat, Republican conversations and arguments, because that is what captures the people's attention. But then implicitly, we have people doing the really hard work, such as yourself, that are working to keep it together behind the scenes. Is that a fair representation?
Well, I think there is a lot of rhetoric, as unfortunately is in American politics, not just in energy, but in everything. Is tend to get the extreme views, and there's not a lot of, hey, why don't we sit down and figure out where we agree first, and try to find that common ground, and then build on that. That is not as prevalent maybe as it should be or used to be. Congress is kind of set up for the back and forth and kind of the extremes. There's not a lot of benefit to being, kind of trying to look for common ground as much. So I think that's unfortunate, because there are things that, both sides on the issue can agree with. And if you try to get people together and start with that, like, for example, we all want to, have cleaner air and lower emissions. Let's figure out how we can produce more energy while also lowering emissions. That seems like something that we can get, pretty much full agreement on. And then you figure out how to do it. Like, for example, I always try to remind, folks who may come at oil and gas, is that, one of the major reasons the United States has lowered our overall emissions since 2005 is transitioning coal-fired power generation facilities to natural gas. So if we can all agree on that statistic, which is from the EIA, it's nonpartisan, then okay, let's find a fact that we can all agree on, and then move towards that. So I try to find those kind of areas of agreement, and try to bring people together, in that sense. And I think, again, one of the mistakes maybe that has been made in the debate is when you pitch certain forms of energy off each other. Like, it's not oil and gas versus renewables. It's not this kind of energy versus the other. Sometimes we get into that. It's just, how can we produce energy that is, abundant, affordable, and lowers emissions? Like, that should be the goal. And then however we do that, let's look at what makes the most sense for our country, for what we have here in the United States, and then make policies kind of that go down that path. And, so we try to, in our discussions, we try to steer people towards, logical conclusions like that.
Well, good luck
It's not
trying to steal
always.
people's logic. Right, right. Why? I know that one of the most important missions, and I know this because I align myself with this mission just given the virtue of what I do. But one of the things that I very much respect is trying to educate people as to what exactly happens in the industry, who your members are, and the workers that make it happen. Why do you think energy production and people who are in energy production are such easy targets, generally speaking? Why do you think that is?
Oh, when you say easy targets, you mean politically, just kind of as
That is
when you
in,
say
in
easy
any way,
targets.
shape, or form where we're the bad guy, because there's more than enough arguments where oil and gas people are the bad guys. Whether it's from taking,
Yeah, yeah,
greedy
that
CEOs or polluting the planet. What is it that
right.
people are not understanding?
It's a good question, and it's really one of the things that frustrates me and angers me, quite a bit is when I see the good men and women that are going out there in places like the Permian when it's hot, or up in North Dakota when it's freezing cold, and they're out there, you know, working very hard for not only for themselves, for their paycheck, for their families, but they're working to produce the energy that literally keeps this country going and keeps folks warm at night, and allows our economy to continue. And then when they're somehow scapegoated, for a political point, it's just unforgivable, and it really personally angers me. Why are they targeted? I think it's just politics. I think to some extent it's that the men and women that work in the industry, they just want to go out and work and do their job, and they're not there to defend themselves. They're not busy, you know,
Right.
um,
It's not
necessarily
performative.
engaged in. Right. They want to go out, work, get their job done, do what needs to be done for the country, go home and see their family. And then you have folks that are, solely trying to score political points that target them, and that's unfortunate, and it's really not fair. And what I always try to remind people is that if not for the work of these men and women, to kind of picture where the country would be, picture where you would be personally, and maybe the whole energy security discussion has helped bring folks around to that, but you still see it. So certainly hasn't brought everybody around.
And I very much respect that. I understand that real politic can get very nasty very quickly.
Mhm.
And I respect that you even venture into that arena, because most people do not come out unscathed one way or another. Even at that, like you're saying, it angers you because you know that these are men and women just trying to earn a living like anyone else, but they're, like you say, they're scapegoated. And I had a mental image when you were speaking earlier about, you're trying to provide some facts about a congressman's district, right? And yet you're trying to talk
Mhm.
into their ear, but on the other ear, they've got 9,000 screaming children, all pulling at them, tugging at them, trying to get a piece of their attention, trying to tell them something, and you're trying to feed them a little common sense among the noise of people who are like everyone who's
Yeah,
trying to get a piece. That's how
right.
I pictured it.
I mean, it's true. I think the political, discourse is there's a lot of data, there's a lot of talking out there, and it's kind of you got to kind of rise to the top, and that's why we already talked about just finding those connections. You got to get your message above the heap somehow, because there's a lot of noise out there, on social media, on all the there's so many more news sources now, both social media and others, than there were before. There's a lot of noise, and you get if you want your message to be remembered and rise above, you gotta really work at that. It's not an easy task.
No, without a doubt. And you're right, actually. There is a lot of noise in the environment, in the marketplace. And what you're trying to provide is signal. You're trying to provide a signal among the noise. And I very much respect that, because without trying to address some very common sense factors. But without that, the conversation just gets away. And again, it becomes very performative. And if
Right.
people are not held to account for certain things, well, then they'll be carried, like almost literally carried away by someone else who has the money, the argument, the votes, or the structure to take someone away from what really makes good common sense. How did you? And I know you went to law school, but how did you get into this particular area? What led you up to that? I know that you had spent quite a good deal of time on Capitol Hill, but what led you to being interested in politics or in Washington in the first place?
Yeah, well, so I was actually finishing my LLM degree, which is a post law degree at American University up in DC. I had worked on the Hill briefly, as an intern when I was younger. So I was up there, and I started just having conversations with some of the Texas members of the delegation to see if there was any opportunities. I had some schooling left to do at night, but I had time. I had the opportunity to maybe get a full time job during the day. Ended up getting connected with former Congressman Mac Thornberry, who was a Texan from represented the Panhandle in Wichita Falls area. He was on Armed Services. He was in the process of writing the Military Commissions Act and ensuring that was done constitutionally, et cetera. So he's looking for a lawyer to help him with that. And so we got connected, started talking. He hired me on as his legislative counsel. I started off just doing a lot of that Military Commissions Act work, but then he gave me other issues. I took on energy and judicial issues for him, and ended up staying with him for 4 years. I really enjoyed it. And then a couple of years down the line, my home congressional district here in Houston, Congressman Poe was looking for a legislative director to run his policy shop, and we got connected, and it just worked out. And then I stayed with him for the rest of his career for almost 9.5 years, and worked my way up in his office to chief of staff, and really enjoyed that opportunity. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And then he retired. He was in the process of retiring, and that's when I kind of moved full time back home to Houston, and got connected with this association and built out a lot of what the government affairs and policy work that we do. So it's been a fun career so far, and looking forward to going forward.
Yeah, but it seems like you're a very natural fit for the position that you're in. You've had an interest in politics, you've had an interest in policy, and obviously the very particulars on the legal side. And so I think that makes you a very natural fit. And I really do appreciate also that, and dare I maybe one of the few people to say something positive about attorneys, because attorneys are also frequently very, very malaligned, very maligned. But the one
Yeah.
thing that I really appreciate is that there has to be considered thought. There has to be, let's look at this issue, let's take it apart, right? There's multiple interpretations,
Yeah.
and everything is based on interpretation. And we have to take a very
Right.
considered look at this. And it allows you to be a little more balanced, as opposed to someone who really has to lead with their hair on fire, because that's how politicians, right? They
Right.
get attention, they get everything like that. And it's really but it's the policy people that present the papers that do, it's all the unseen superstructure. I don't even want to say infrastructure, because thinking about the partners
Mhm.
that you have, and it's a global scope, this is a superstructure underneath this little show that people watch on the news for half an hour at the end of the day. Like, oh, they said this, they said that. But no one understands the vastness of what's going on. When I mentioned global, I know that your member organizations some of them are also multinationals. Could you explain a little bit of how your organization also takes into account the global energy workspace?
Yeah, great question. So, our membership is around 200 companies, and I'd say probably the top 30 in size of those are multinational companies They operate all over the world in multiple countries, helping to produce oil and gas. We have equipment manufacturers that build the best, most technologically advanced oil field and other equipment that's used all around the world to produce energy. So a lot, in addition to kind of the domestic political, sphere that we've talked a lot about, we have to worry about what's going on internationally. We have to tell the story of these companies, both to the U.S. government and policymakers, because a lot of it is ensuring that our policymakers here in the United States set up, policies and procedures that allow U.S. companies to trade and to exist abroad and all of that. But also, we have to work with, foreign countries and foreign governments and explain to them the benefits of, dealing with our companies and sometimes letting our companies into their markets. So that's a big part of what we do, as well. For example, we just had, last month, we helped the U.S. State Department with, there was a Korean strategic energy dialogue where a high-level group from Korea came over to the United States. They came to Houston, and we hosted them at a number of our member facilities to show them kind of what our companies do, the opportunities that may exist in Korea, and had that event with them. So, we do events like that throughout the whole year. In addition, as an association, we actually train U.S. State Department, Commerce, and other officials before they're going to go abroad, or sometimes they're already abroad. But when they're working in a foreign embassy, generally in places where oil and gas is produced or other forms of energy that our companies are going to be involved in, we train them. We give them a background on the oil and gas industry, on the energy industry as a whole, and kind of the issues that are going to come up in their work dealing with our companies when they're abroad. That's a huge part of what we do as an association. In fact, we teach those week-long courses twice a year, and they're almost always sold out. So there's a lot of demand for that. We also will work. We have international chapters both in the Middle East and in Latin America, and we will work on trade delegation trips where we'll introduce our companies to particular markets. We'll connect them with both U.S. and foreign government officials in those regions to help push them into those markets. Our membership is pretty diverse. We have large multinational companies, as I mentioned, that have been in these countries for decades, if longer, and then we also have companies that maybe have just traditionally looked domestically for their markets, but now want to expand. And that's kind of part of what we do is we'll help those companies make those connections and make that jump into expansion. I personally think the story of the oilfield services sector is a great American story. Our companies basically built this sector, and we can then export our knowledge and our equipment abroad and help other people produce energy, in their countries. I think it's a good story, and it's something that we're proud to do, and we think is a good story to tell.
Absolutely. What I find disheartening, but again, it's the same. It's always the same, right? Everything is its own double-edged sword. Of course, the United States has to lead the way. Of course, we have to lead the way. But at the same time, everybody wants to attack the 800-pound gorilla, right? Right. You need someone to lead the way, but it's always fun to throw rocks at the leader because that's what you do when you're behind, right? But without the leader, you're in the middle of nowhere. So I do find it interesting that the United States has to lobby globally and has to even bring in other nation states, like you're saying, in the Middle East and in Latin America, and bring them along. Because if the United States is not leading the way in clear, conscious, level-headed energy discussions, it's not going anywhere. And I really appreciate that. That is tremendous work. That is tremendous. So, and who would have even thought about that, right? You have men and women who go to embassies and consulates around the world where there's energy production. Well, who's going to brief them on that? Are they going to watch a YouTube video? Who's going to brief them on this? And that's fascinating work. I didn't even know that you did that.
It's true. And, we've been doing it for 30 years. And they come to Houston. It's an organized thing that's happened for quite a while, and it's an important thing for us because it benefits our companies to ensure that these men and women that are going to serve our country and abroad, we want to make sure they have the facts. They know what because they'll often be called in to do services for Americans that are in these countries that need help, or may run into a trade issue, or there's all kinds of issues that come up, and so we want to make sure that they have the knowledge to do that job well. And it's not we're not trying to push any particular view with it. We just give them the facts and say, hey, this is what offshore energy production looks like. This is what well stimulation is, and this is how it works. This is how we do contracts. This is the kind of work that you're going to see, and it's been a great opportunity for us. And we also love, we enjoy meeting these men and women because we might have them in a course, and then 6 years later there's in another embassy where we then have a contact. So it's really a mutually beneficial thing for both sides. And
that is amazing, and I'm very proud that the government, that our federal government recognizes that, and recognizes the work that you do, and that you do provide, again, regardless of the political position, that you are providing facts, and that it can be taken as and they're taken as facts, not taken as any position pushing. And I really, really love that. I love that. That is huge, and I was unaware of that. In some of the areas that the association addresses, such as energy supply and access, technology, regulation, and then in terms of talking about the story of American oil and gas production and the men and women who do it. Again, and forgive me if I seem like I'm asking you the same question again, maybe because I'm just not satisfied with any answer, is why does it seem that the story, because I agree with you, this is an American success story. This is I think that you could go anywhere in the Permian, and this is me. I think you can go anywhere in the Permian. You could grab some guy by the FRs, by the collar. You could pick him up. You could drop him in Times Square, New York City, and he is going to have a metric ton of things to teach the people that are there. Work, resilience, grit, find another way. Don't worry. Yeah. Take the heat, take the abuse, take the malignment away from home for weeks at a time. I mean, the entire country could learn from what is happening here. And I think that it's very nice that the rest of the country can afford to party, say, while the rest of us are doing the work. And a lot of people have the luxury to discuss what's going on over here without understanding one iota of what it takes to do. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that Americans now have become a little too distant. But again, this is part of how it's supposed to be designed. We want perfection of the generations. We don't want things getting harder and harder for our children. They should be getting easier and easier. But at the same time, don't mistake that it's easy for you on all the work that it took for other people to do. And I find that to be also very, very sad, because even when people talk about transitioning away from oil and gas, and Tim, this is my point, no one discusses, I get it as a fuel, I get it as electricity for energy, but no one discusses materials, plastics, fibers.
It's true.
No one discusses that. Where is that supposed to come from? Even if we switch automatically to electric vehicles, where are we going to get all our fibers and our plastics from?
Yeah, it's always a focus on transportation, and it's just getting those facts out. I mean, a lot of folks live in their own bubble. They know a lot about one thing, and they don't really think about where their food comes from, or where materials come from, or where their energy comes from. It's just a step away removed from their day-to-day thinking, and that's just part of our role is to try to remind folks that it does matter, and that it does matter where your energy comes from, and it matters where your food comes from, and that these complex supply chains that we have created in the past 100, 200 years, they've given us the luxury of not having to worry about where our energy and where our food come from. that's one of the reasons we have all this time to do other things. I mean, it gives us the modern world. I mean, our ancestors, I think that was the most of their concerns in a day was where they were getting their energy and fuel and water and food from. That was by the time they figured all that out, it was time to go to bed. So we need to remind folks that this modern society, this modern world we live in, is because of all these supply chains we've set up, and energy is really kind of the beginning of all of that, because you can't do really anything else unless you have energy.
Without a doubt.
So yeah.
As a child, I watched H.G. Wells' The Time Machine as the classic version, and I remember the film very well. I remember some scenes very well, but the one thing that I remember is that you have the people who live on the surface, the Elons. I don't remember what they were called, but the people who lived on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But then you had people who lived down below in the caves, and they were the Morlocks. And they are the ones that kept the technology and kept everything running deep underground so people could live in a literal Eden and paradise on the surface. But we shunned away the Morlocks. We didn't want to know about them. We didn't care about them.
Yeah.
And it becomes uncomfortable. It becomes terribly uncomfortable, because you look at someone else and you say, were it not for the work that you do, I could not have the life that I have. And when someone can't square that circle and say, I have something of equal value to give back to you, what are you going to do? You're going to have to push them away, and you're going to have to chastise, because they know in their heart of hearts, you don't have anything that can equally compensate what this person has done and has given for you. And I think that frustration, because most people can't look at themselves, but they have to look someplace else, right, before they look at themselves. Then they'll go ahead and blame other people for things that they should be taking responsibility for. And I agree. I think that if people who are against oil and gas are very sincere, they should stop being performative, throwing soup in museums, gluing their hands. What they should be doing is they should be getting a coalition and writing a letter, and they should be going to Shell. And they should say, what can we do? Because we can't stop what you're doing. You're already doing it. These are our concerns. What can we do to help you get along to these concerns? Because I think otherwise, again, it's just being very performative, and I think it doesn't add anything to the conversation. And quite frankly, it's the opposite. It becomes more divisive, because now you're pulling, like we were talking earlier, you're pulling people in one direction and another, and you're taking them away from an intelligent, concerted conversation about how to find solutions. And that's even, again, Ray Trevino, we'll give it to him on the Crude Truth. He thanked you, and I want to thank you for consistently and willingly walking that line to defend American interests, to defend American jobs. And it's not just American jobs, but jobs around the world related to oil and gas and energy production in efficient, inexpensive, and reliable energy. And I really just want to thank you so much for that, Tim.
Well, I appreciate the thanks, but I'm sitting here in an office in Houston. I don't really deserve as much thanks as the folks out there in the Permian and up there in the Dakotas and all around the world that are really out there every single day producing the energy that makes our lives possible, makes us be able to sit here and have this nice conversation with over the internet and in our nice air conditioned offices. That's all because of them. So, I really thank them every day and what they're doing.
That's awesome. But you know what? And since this is my show, I get to call the rules, because this is my show. So therefore, by definition, you are an oil field leader. You may not put FRs, and you may not, get dust in your eye when the wind kicks up, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You are our brother and our compatriot, because you are, and you're fighting for the same things that we're fighting for. You just do it a little bit differently. And I don't think anyone could take an iota away from you or respect for that. So for that, Tim, I want to say, no, brother, thank you. Thank you very much for everything that you do, and that the Energy Workforce and Technology Council is doing to get the story out of men and women in this country and the work that they do. Anything that I can do to help support in that mission, you're going to find me here right beside you.
Well, I appreciate all that you do, and just by getting the message out, through this endeavor here and others, I think that's a big help. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Awesome. Tim, I know that we are coming into an election year we are in an election year, and I'm sure that probably I'm sure that your calendar from November to December is pretty well booked, I'm going to guess. But I would love to have you back on the show, maybe right after the election, and we can discuss maybe a couple of issues real quick and maybe even make it a regular feature.
I'd be happy to do it, and always happy to come on and talk with about the election, what it means for our workforce, what it means for the outlook politically for our companies. So I'm happy to do it. Just give me a date and we'll lock it in.
Done deal. It's a done deal.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to please, Mr. Tim Tarpley, check him out on LinkedIn. Go to the website Energy Workforce. Is that right?
Yes. .org.
EnergyWorkforce.org. The links will be in the description below. Absolutely make sure you're doing everything to support the men and women who do everything to support us. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating in this episode of the Oilfield How was that, Tim?
Good. Good discussion.
Was it? I leave it for you to say. I'm just an idiot in a garage in a small room.
No, I enjoyed it.
Very cool.